Sarah Chun had always known she was different. Growing up in San Francisco's Chinatown, she was the girl who climbed the tallest buildings, dove off the highest piers, and never backed down from challenge. While her classmates dreamed of becoming doctors or lawyers like their parents wanted, Sarah dreamed of something else entirely. She dreamed of serving her country in ways that most people couldn't even imagine. Her father, David Chun, had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1970s with nothing but a suitcase and determination. He built a small restaurant from scratch, working 18-hour days to provide for his family. He wanted his daughter to have the opportunities he never had: a college education, a safe office job, a comfortable life. The last thing he expected was for Sarah to announce at her high school graduation party that she was joining the Navy. "You're throwing your life away," he had said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I worked so hard so you wouldn't have to struggle like I did." But Sarah saw it differently. She saw military service as the highest form of contribution she could make. While her friends headed off to college, she reported to Navy boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, with a secret goal that she shared with no one. She didn't just want to serve in the Navy. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. The problem was that in 2010, women weren't allowed in combat roles. The SEAL teams were exclusively male, and most people believed they always would be. But Sarah had read about the mounting pressure on the military to open all positions to qualified candidates regardless of gender. She sensed that change was coming, and she wanted to be ready when it did. During her first assignment aboard the USS Roosevelt, Sarah threw herself into physical training with an intensity that shocked her shipmates. While others relaxed during their off-duty hours, she was in the gym or running laps around the ship's deck. She studied every piece of SEAL training material she could get her hands on. She learned about the history of naval special warfare, memorized the capabilities of every weapon in the SEAL arsenal, and pushed her body to limits she didn't know existed. Her division chief, Master Chief Rodriguez, noticed her dedication. He was a former SEAL himself, forced into a regular Navy role after a training accident damaged his knee. One evening, he found Sarah practicing knot tying on the fantail, working by the light of small flashlight. "Chin, what the hell are you doing out here?" he asked, though his tone was more curious than angry. "Practicing maritime knots, Master Chief," she replied without looking up. "The bowline, figure 8, trucker's hitch. If you can't tie a knot fast in the dark, you're useless in maritime operations." Rodriguez studied her for a moment. He recognized the look in her eyes, the same hunger he had seen in every successful SEAL candidate he had ever met. "You know women can't be SEALs, right?" "Not yet," Sarah replied, finally meeting his gaze. "But that doesn't mean never." Something in her voice made Rodriguez take a step back. He had heard rumors about potential policy changes, whispers in the special operations community about pressure from Congress and the Pentagon to evaluate all combat exclusions. Most of the old-timers dismissed it as political nonsense that would never amount to anything. But looking at this young sailor, Rodriguez wondered if maybe they were wrong. Over the following months, Rodriguez became an unofficial mentor to Sarah. He couldn't officially prepare her for SEAL training. That would have been career suicide for both of them. But he could push her harder than anyone else, test her limits, and help her develop the mental toughness that separated SEALs from ordinary warriors. He made her swim endless laps in the ship's pool while carrying weights. He woke her up at midnight for surprise physical training sessions. He tested her knowledge of tactics, weapons, and maritime operations with questions that would challenge seasoned officers. Through it all, Sarah never complained, never asked for special treatment, and never showed weakness. Other sailors began to notice. Some admired her dedication. Others resented what they saw as grandstanding. A few made crude jokes about what a woman was trying to prove. Sarah ignored them all. She had learned early in life that proving people wrong was more effective than arguing with them. The real test came during a port visit to Bahrain. The ship was conducting training exercises with local forces, and Rodriguez arranged for Sarah to participate in a joint operation as an observer. It was supposed to be a routine exercise, practicing boarding procedures on a mock pirate vessel in the Persian Gulf. Everything went wrong from the start. The pirate vessel was actually occupied by real smugglers who hadn't gotten the message about the exercise. When the boarding party approached, they were met with gunfire instead of blank ammunition. The exercise immediately became a live combat situation. Sarah found herself crouched behind a shipping container as bullets pinged off the metal around her. The boarding officer had taken shrapnel to his leg and was unable to continue leading the operation. Radio communications were failing due to interference from the ship's electronics. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. That's when Sarah did something that would define the rest of her career. She took charge. "Rodriguez, take Martinez and circle around the port side," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll provide cover fire and advance on the starboard entrance. Jenkins, get on the radio and tell the Roosevelt we need medical evacuation for Lieutenant Morrison." "Chun, you're not in charge here," Rodriguez shouted back, though he was already moving toward his assigned position. "Someone has to be," Sarah replied, checking her weapon and preparing to advance. What happened next will be talked about in Navy circles for years. Sarah led a textbook small unit operation, coordinating 3 separate teams to neutralize the threats while minimizing casualties. She demonstrated tactical awareness that impressed even the most experienced operators. When one of the smugglers tried to escape by jumping overboard, Sarah dove in after him, apprehending him in the water despite rough seas and poor visibility. By the time backup arrived, the situation was completely under control. The smugglers were in custody, no American personnel had suffered serious injuries, and a significant drug shipment had been seized. The after-action report praised the exceptional leadership and tactical competence displayed by Petty Officer Chun under combat conditions. Where the incident reached higher levels of command faster than Sarah expected. Within a week, she received orders to report to Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The official reason was administrative processing, but Rodriguez knew better. "They're going to offer you something," he told her the night before she transferred off the Roosevelt. "I don't know what and I don't know when, but someone upstairs is paying attention now. Whatever they offer you, remember that you earned it. Don't let anyone tell you different." Sarah arrived at Coronado on a Monday morning in March 2012. The base was everything she had imagined. Sprawling training facilities, obstacle courses that looked designed to break both bodies and spirits, and everywhere she looked, the distinctive trident insignia that marked the home of the SEALs. She was directed to report to Captain Williams, a stern-faced officer with over 20 years in special operations. His office overlooked the training compounds where SEAL candidates were currently suffering through Hell Week. The sounds of instructors shouting at exhausted trainees drifted through the window. "Sit down, Chin," Captain Williams said without looking up from her file. "I've been reading about your little adventure in Bahrain. Impressive work." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, sitting at attention. "I'm not sure you understand what kind of attention you've attracted," Williams continued, finally meeting her eyes. "There are people in Washington who think it's time to reevaluate some of our personnel policies. They're looking for test cases, people who can prove that competence matters more than demographics." Sarah felt her heart racing but kept her expression neutral. "Sir, how would you feel about being a guinea pig, Chun? Because that's what this would be. You'd be under a microscope from day one. Every failure would be magnified. Every success would be dismissed as special treatment. You'd face opposition from people who have been doing this job since before you were born." Williams stood up and walked to the window, watching the SEAL candidates struggling through an obstacle course. "I've been in this business for a long time, Chun. I've seen tough people break under the pressure of BUD/S training. I've seen men who thought they were warriors quit after 3 days of Hell Week. This isn't like anything you've experienced, no matter how much you've prepared." He turned back to face her. "But I've also seen something in your record that reminds me of the best operators I've ever worked with. You don't quit, you think under pressure, and you lead from the front. Those are the qualities that make SEALs, regardless of what package they come in." Sarah finally found her voice. "What exactly are you offering me, sir?" Williams smiled for the first time since she had entered his office. "The chance to make history, Chun. Congress is about to mandate that the military open all combat positions to qualified women. Instead of waiting for that mandate and scrambling to implement it, some of us think we should get ahead of the curve. We want to run a pilot program. See if we can identify and train female candidates who can meet our standards without any modifications or special accommodations. He picked up a folder from his desk and handed it to her. Inside, there is an application for a classified program that officially doesn't exist yet. If you're accepted, you'll go through the full BUD/S course alongside male candidates. Same standards, same treatment, same expectations. The only difference is that you'll be making history. Sarah opened the folder and stared at the documents inside. Everything she had dreamed of, everything she had worked for was right there in front of her. But Williams wasn't finished. I need to be clear about something, Chun. This isn't just about you anymore. If you succeed, you'll open doors for other women. If you fail, you might close them for a generation. That's not fair, but it's reality. The question is, are you prepared for that kind of responsibility? Sarah looked up from the documents, her mind racing through everything that had led to this moment. Her father's disappointment when she joined the Navy, the long nights of training aboard the Roosevelt, the gunfire in Bahrain, and the split-second decisions that had kept everyone alive. Rodriguez's words about earning whatever came next. "When do I start, sir?" she asked. Williams's smile grew wider. BUD/S Class 314 begins in 6 weeks. That gives you time to complete some additional preparatory training and handle the administrative requirements. But, Chun, before you sign those papers, I want you to understand something. Once you're in the program, there's no special treatment, no second chances, and no excuses. You succeed or fail on the same terms as every other candidate. "I wouldn't want it any other way, sir," Sarah replied, already reaching for a pen. As she signed the documents that would change her life, Sarah didn't know that news of the pilot program had already leaked to the media. She didn't know that her name was being discussed in Pentagon briefings and congressional committees. She didn't know that there were people actively working to ensure her failure, just as there were others committed to supporting her success. All she knew was that she had been given the chance she had dreamed of. In 6 weeks, she would begin the most demanding military training program in the world. She would be tested in ways that broke most of the men who attempted it. She would face challenges that had nothing to do with physical fitness or tactical knowledge. Challenges that came from being the first woman ever to attempt what many considered impossible. But that was still 6 weeks away. First, she had to survive the preparatory training that Williams had arranged, training that would push her beyond anything she had experienced on the Roosevelt. Training that would either prepare her for the challenge ahead or break her before she even reached the starting line. As Sarah left Williams's office, she caught sight of her reflection in the window overlooking the training compound. She looked small and young, surrounded by the institutional weight of Naval Special Warfare Command. But her eyes held a determination that had carried her from a San Francisco restaurant to the threshold of history. She had no idea that in just a few months, she would be standing in a Norfolk cafeteria facing down 50 of the most elite warriors in the American military. She had no idea that 4 words from a cocky petty officer would create a moment that would be remembered decades later. She only knew that she had work to do. The 6 weeks of preparatory training that followed were unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her life. Captain Williams hadn't been exaggerating when he said she would need to be ready for challenges beyond the standard BUD/S curriculum. The pilot program meant that every aspect of her preparation was being watched, analyzed, and documented by people she would never meet. Her days began at 0400 with a 5-mile run on the beach, followed by 2 hours of swimming in the Pacific Ocean. The instructors assigned to her preparatory training were all former SEALs who had volunteered for the program despite significant resistance from their peers. They pushed her through workouts that would have hospitalized most people, but they also shared knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson became her primary trainer. He was a 20-year veteran who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, a man whose weathered face and quiet intensity commanded immediate respect. On her first day, he made his position clear. "I didn't volunteer for this program because I believe in social experiments," he told her as they stood on the beach in the pre-dawn darkness. "I volunteered because I believe in excellence. If you can meet the standards, I don't care what you are. If you can't, you don't belong here." Period. Thompson's training methods were unconventional. Where other instructors might focus on building strength or endurance, he concentrated on breaking down and rebuilding her mental approach to stress. He would wake her up in the middle of the night with simulated emergency scenarios, force her to solve complex problems while physically exhausted, and constantly change the rules of exercises just when she thought she understood them. Bud/S isn't about being the strongest or the fastest, he explained during one particularly brutal session where she had been carrying a boat over her head for 20 minutes. It's about continuing to function when your body wants to quit and your mind is telling you to give up. It's about making good decisions when everything around you is chaos. The psychological pressure was intense. Sarah knew that every training session was being evaluated not just by her instructors, but by senior officers who were deciding whether the entire program should continue. She received regular updates from Captain Williams about the political battles being fought over her participation. Some congressional representatives were pushing for immediate implementation of gender-integrated special operations. Others were arguing that the entire concept was a dangerous distraction from military readiness. "There are people betting on you to fail," Williams told her during one of their weekly meetings. "They think that one failure will prove their point that women don't belong in combat roles. But there are also people betting on you to succeed, and they're taking just as big a risk. Don't let either group put additional pressure on you. Focus on the training." But the pressure was impossible to ignore, especially when it came from unexpected directions. Sarah's father had somehow learned about her selection for the program, and his reaction was even worse than when she had first joined the Navy. He flew to San Diego unannounced, appearing at the base gate and demanding to see her. "This is insanity," he said when they met in a small conference room on base. "You're risking your life for what? To prove some political point? Sarah, you're my only daughter. I can't lose you to this foolishness." "Dad, this isn't foolishness," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is the most important thing I've ever done. Not just for me, but for every woman who will come after me. And what if you die? What if this training kills you? Will that be worth it for the women who come after you?" The question haunted Sarah more than she cared to admit. The statistics on BUD/S training were sobering. The injury rate was significant, and while deaths were rare, they had occurred. She was about to attempt something that had broken thousands of men, many of whom had been bigger, stronger, and more physically prepared than she was. But she also thought about the women currently serving in support roles in Afghanistan and Iraq, women who were already facing combat situations without the training and equipment that would be available to special operations personnel. She thought about future conflicts where the artificial barriers between combat and support roles would be meaningless. And she thought about the principle that her father had actually taught her, that sometimes you had to take risks to achieve something worthwhile. "Dad, you risked everything when you came to America," she finally said. "You left everything you knew to give me opportunities you never had. This is my opportunity. This is what I'm choosing to do with the life you helped me build." Her father left without saying goodbye, but not before making it clear that he considered her decision a betrayal of everything he had sacrificed for her. Sarah threw herself back into training with renewed intensity, using the emotional pain as fuel for the physical demands she was facing. As her preparatory training neared its end, Sarah began to hear rumors about BUD/S Class 314, the class she would be joining. It was supposed to be one of the largest classes in recent memory, with over 180 candidates beginning the program. The instructors expected a typical attrition rate of about 80%, meaning that fewer than 40 people would ultimately earn their trident. 2 weeks before the class began, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Master Chief Rodriguez had taken leave and driven down from his current assignment to see how she was progressing. They met at a small restaurant near the base, where Rodriguez ordered coffee and studied her with the same intensity he had shown aboard the Roosevelt. "You look different," he said after several minutes of silence. "Harder, more focused." "I feel different," Sarah admitted. "This training has changed me in ways I didn't expect. I'm stronger than I was, but it's more than that. I think differently now about what's possible." Rodriguez nodded. "That's what real training does. It doesn't just prepare your body. It changes your mind about what you can accomplish. But I need to tell you something, Chun. There are rumors going around the fleet about what you're doing. Not everyone is happy about it. What kind of rumors? The kind that suggests some people are hoping you'll fail dramatically. There's talk about making sure you don't receive any special treatment, which is code for making sure you receive worse treatment. You need to be prepared for instructors who might push you harder than the male candidates. Not to help you succeed, but to justify your failure. Sarah had suspected that she would face additional challenges, but hearing it confirmed by Rodriguez made it real in a way that was both frightening and motivating. What do you think I should do? The same thing you've always done, Rodriguez replied. Work harder than everyone else, never complain, and prove them wrong through performance. But also remember that you're not just representing yourself anymore. Every woman in the military is going to be judged by how well you do. That responsibility weighed heavily on Sarah as the final days of her preparatory training concluded. She had reached physical and mental capabilities that she hadn't known were possible 6 weeks earlier. She could swim distances that would have seemed impossible, carry loads that would have crushed her, and solve problems under stress that would have paralyzed her before the training began. But she also knew that the real test was still ahead. Bud/S training was designed to break people, to identify the small percentage of individuals who possessed not just physical capability, but the mental toughness and character that made effective special operations personnel. No amount of preparatory training could fully simulate what she was about to experience. On the Sunday before class 314 began, Sarah called her father one final time. He had not spoken to her since his visit to San Diego, and she wasn't sure he would even take her call. When he answered, his voice was cold and formal. I wanted you to know that I start BUD/S training tomorrow, she said, fighting back tears. I know you don't approve, but I need you to know that everything you taught me about working hard and never giving up is what got me here. There was a long pause before her father spoke. Sarah, I'm afraid for you. Not because I don't think you're capable, but because I know the world you're entering. It's not going to be fair to you. Nothing worthwhile is ever fair, Dad. You taught me that too. Another pause. Call me when you graduate, he said finally. I'll be waiting. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked down to the beach near the bays and stared out at the Pacific Ocean, listening to the waves crash against the shore. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would either make her one of the most elite warriors in the American military or break her completely. There would be no middle ground. At 0500 the next morning, Sarah Chun stood in formation with 179 other candidates as they were welcomed to BUD/S Class 314. She was the only woman in the group, a fact that drew stares and whispers from her fellow candidates. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. The head instructor, Senior Chief Petty Officer Williams, no relation to Captain Williams, addressed the class with the traditional welcome that had intimidated thousands of candidates over the years. Gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying across the formation, then paused as he noticed Sarah. Candidates, you are here because you think you want to become Navy SEALs. Over the next 6 months, we're going to find out if you're right. Most of you will not finish this program. That's not a threat. It's a mathematical certainty. He walked along the formation, making eye contact with as many candidates as possible. When he reached Sarah, he stopped for a moment longer than with the others. This is not about proving political points, he continued, still looking at Sarah. This is not about making history. This is about finding people who can do a job that requires exceptional physical, mental, and emotional capabilities. If you're here for any reason other than becoming the best special operations warrior you can possibly be, you should quit right now and save everyone time. Nobody moved. Outstanding, Senior Chief Williams said. Let's begin. What followed was a day of administrative processing, medical evaluations, and initial physical assessments that would establish baseline measurements for each candidate. Sarah performed well on all evaluations, placing in the top 20% of the class on most measures. But she also noticed the way some of the male candidates looked at her, not with the curious respect she had become accustomed to, but with something closer to resentment. During the lunch break, she overheard a conversation between 2 candidates that made her understand the challenge she was facing. I heard they lowered the standards for her, one of them said, a tall guy from Texas whose name tape read Morrison. "That's bullshit," replied his companion, a stocky former Marine named Rodriguez. "If they lower the standards for her, it cheapens what we're trying to accomplish. Either way, she doesn't belong here," Morrison continued. "This isn't some equal opportunity program. People's lives depend on what we do." Sarah wanted to confront them, to explain that she was being held to exactly the same standards as everyone else. But she remembered the advice she had received from Chief Thompson and Master Chief Rodriguez. The best response to skepticism was superior performance. That evening, the class received their first taste of what the next 6 months would bring. They were formed up on the beach for what the instructors called surf appreciation, a euphemistic term for being forced to lie in the freezing Pacific Ocean until their body temperature dropped to dangerous levels, then perform exercises while their muscles cramped and their minds grew foggy from hypothermia. Sarah had experienced cold water training during her preparatory program, but this was different. The instructors seemed determined to find the breaking point of every candidate as quickly as possible. They screamed constantly, demanding perfect form on exercises while the candidates shivered uncontrollably and fought to maintain consciousness. 3 candidates quit during the first session. They simply stood up, walked to the instructors, and announced that they were done. No one tried to talk them out of it. The instructors accepted their decisions without comment and directed them to ring the brass bell that sat on a post overlooking the beach, the bell that symbolized the end of dreams for everyone who rang it. Sarah lasted through the entire session, but only barely. When it was finally over and the candidates were allowed to return to their barracks, she could hardly walk. Her core body temperature had dropped so low that she was unable to stop shivering for over an hour. But she had not quit, and she had not asked for help. In the shower afterward, she noticed Morrison watching her with an expression that had changed from resentment to something closer to grudging respect. "You did okay out there," he said quietly. "Thanks," Sarah replied, not sure if it was meant as a compliment or an insult. "But that was just the warm-up," Morrison continued. "Wait until Hell Week." Hell Week was still 2 months away, but already it loomed over the entire class like a gathering storm. Everyone knew the statistics. Most people who quit BUD/S training quit during Hell Week. 5 days and nights of continuous physical and mental stress designed to break anyone who lacked the absolute determination necessary for special operations. But first, the class had to survive the preliminary phases of training, which were challenging enough to eliminate most candidates. Every day brought new tests of physical capability, mental toughness, and the ability to function as part of a team under extreme stress. Sarah excelled at some portions of the training and struggled with others. Her swimming ability, enhanced by months of preparation, put her near the top of the class in water-based exercises. Her performance on long-distance runs was solid, but not spectacular. Where she truly distinguished herself was in the problem-solving exercises that required candidates to work together under pressure. During one memorable exercise, the class was divided into boat crews and given the task of moving a 300-pound rubber boat over a series of obstacles while blindfolded. Most crews struggled to coordinate their movements and communicate effectively. Sarah's crew, initially skeptical of following a woman's lead, found themselves succeeding through her ability to organize their efforts and maintain clear communication under stress. By the end of the first month, Class 314 had shrunk from 180 candidates to 134. Sarah was still there, having survived everything the instructors had thrown at her. She had earned the grudging respect of most of her fellow candidates and the attention of the instructoral staff, though she couldn't tell whether that attention was positive or negative. She was about to find out, because tomorrow, the real training would begin. The second month of BUD/S training introduced Sarah to levels of exhaustion she hadn't known existed. Every day began before dawn with physical training that would have been considered a full workout by most people, followed by hours of instruction on weapons, tactics, and small unit operations. The afternoons were reserved for what the instructors called character development, exercises designed to test each candidate's determination and ability to function when their bodies and minds were pushed beyond normal limits. Sarah had developed a routine that helped her cope with the relentless pressure. She was always the first candidate awake each morning, using the quiet time before reveille to mentally prepare for whatever challenges the day might bring. She ate quickly and efficiently, focusing on nutrition rather than taste. Most importantly, she had learned to compartmentalize the pain and exhaustion, treating them as information rather than obstacles. But the second month also brought new challenges that her preparatory training hadn't fully prepared her for. The instructors had identified her as someone who would likely make it to Hell Week, which meant they began focusing additional attention on testing her limits. The extra attention wasn't necessarily hostile, but it was certainly more intense than what most candidates received. "Chun, you're with me today," Senior Chief Williams announced one Tuesday morning as the class formed up for the daily run. "Everyone else, follow Instructor Martinez for the standard 5-mile course. Chun, you and are going to have a conversation while we run." Sarah fell in beside Senior Chief Williams as they set out on what she assumed would be the same route as the rest of the class. She was wrong. Williams led her away from a standard course, heading instead toward the hills behind Coronado that offered a more challenging terrain and complete privacy for whatever conversation he had in mind. "I've been watching your performance for 6 weeks," Williams began as they settled into a steady pace up a steep incline. "You're competent, better than competent in some areas. Your swimming scores put you in the top 10% of the class. Your academic performance is excellent. Your leadership during team exercises has been noted by multiple instructors." Sarah listened without responding, unsure whether she was being praised or criticized. With Senior Chief Williams, the distinction wasn't always clear. "But I'm concerned about something," Williams continued, increasing the pace as they crested the first hill. "You're holding back. I can see it in the way you approach certain exercises. You're calculating how much effort you need to meet the standard rather than giving everything you have." "Senior Chief, I'm not holding back," Sarah replied, though even as she said it, she wondered if he was right. "The hell you're not," Williams shot back. "You think that if you just do enough to pass each test, you'll make it through the program. But Bud/S isn't about meeting minimum standards. It's about finding people who don't have limits, people who will keep going when meeting the standard isn't enough." They ran in silence for several minutes, climbing steadily into terrain that was becoming genuinely difficult to navigate. Sarah could feel her heart rate climbing and her breathing becoming labored, but Williams showed no signs of slowing down. "Let me tell you a story," Williams said, his voice still conversational despite the fact that they were now running up what could only be described as a mountain. 3 years ago, I had a candidate who was a lot like you. Smart, prepared, physically capable. He made it all the way to Hell Week. On the third day, his boat crew was assigned to carry their boat to a checkpoint about 2 miles away. Simple evolution, something they had done dozens of times. Sarah could see where the story was going, but didn't interrupt. The difference was that this time it was raining. Cold rain, the kind that soaks through everything and makes every surface slippery. About halfway to the checkpoint, one of his teammates slipped and injured his ankle. Couldn't put weight on it. Williams stopped abruptly at what appeared to be the top of their climb, though Sarah couldn't see any clear trail continuing forward. The view was spectacular. They could see the entire Coronado Peninsula laid out below them, with the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. The injured candidate expected his teammates to help him. Maybe take turns carrying his gear, slow down the pace, call for medical support. But my candidate, the one who was a lot like you, made a different decision. He told his teammate that he would either keep up with the team or be left behind. No help, no special consideration. "What happened?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. The injured candidate was left behind. He eventually made it to the checkpoint on his own, 3 hours late and hypothermic. He quit that night. Williams turned to look directly at Sarah. "And the candidate who left him behind, the one I said was like you, he graduated. He's currently deployed overseas, and he's one of the most effective operators I've ever trained." Sarah stared at Williams, trying to understand the point of the story. "Are you telling me that I should abandon my teammates if they can't keep up?" "I'm telling you that being a SEAL sometimes means making decisions that seem cruel but are necessary for mission success. I'm telling you that if you hold back because you're afraid of seeming too aggressive or too competitive, you're not going to make it through this program." And more importantly, if you do somehow make it through while holding back, you'll be useless when it matters. William started running again, this time straight down the mountain along what was barely a deer path. Sarah followed, her mind racing as she tried to process what she had just heard. She had been holding back, at least in some ways. She had been so concerned about not appearing to receive special treatment that she had avoided demonstrating her full capabilities in situations where doing so might have been seen as showing off. The run back to base is 7 miles, Williams called over his shoulder. Straight line distance. I don't care what obstacles you encounter. Water, fences, private property, whatever. We're not taking roads. And, Chun, I'm not waiting for you if you can't keep up. What followed was the most challenging run of Sarah's life. Williams set a pace that would have been aggressive on flat ground with a clear path. Running through the hills and valleys between their starting point and the base, navigating obstacles and terrain that seemed designed to break ankles, the pace was nearly impossible to maintain. But Sarah stayed with him. When they encountered a fence that appeared to border private property, she didn't hesitate to climb over it. When they had to cross a creek that was deeper and colder than it looked, she jumped in without slowing down. When Williams led them through a section of thorny brush that left her arms covered in cuts, she pushed through without complaint. They completed the 7-mile run in under 45 minutes, a time that would have been impressive on a track, let alone through the terrain they had covered. When they finally reached the base, Williams stopped and studied Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. "Better," he said simply, "but we're going to do this again tomorrow. And the day after that, until you understand that holding back isn't an option." The next few weeks established a pattern. Every few days, Williams would pull Sarah aside for special training that was designed to test her willingness to push beyond what she thought her limits were. Sometimes it was physical, runs that seemed impossible, swims in conditions that were genuinely dangerous, obstacle courses that had been modified to be more challenging than the standard versions. Sometimes it was mental, problem-solving exercises conducted while exhausted, navigation challenges in unfamiliar terrain, leadership scenarios with no clear correct answers. Through it all, Sarah began to understand what Williams had been trying to tell her. Being a SEAL wasn't about being strong enough or smart enough or tough enough. It was about having no limits, about being willing to continue when continuation seemed impossible. The realization changed how she approached everything. During the next team exercise, when her boat crew was struggling to complete an evolution in the allotted time, Sarah took charge in a way she had been reluctant to do before. She pushed her teammates harder than they wanted to be pushed, demanded performance standards that seemed unreasonable, and refused to accept failure as an option. The result was their fastest time on the evolution and recognition from the instructors that her crew was performing at a higher level than most of the class. But it also created tension with some of her teammates who weren't used to being pushed so hard by anyone, let alone a woman. "What's your problem, Chun?" Morrison asked after a particularly intense training session where Sarah had essentially taken over leadership of their boat crew. "You think you have something to prove?" "I think we all have something to prove," Sarah replied. "Every day. That's why we're here. This isn't about you being the best," Morrison continued, his voice rising. "This is about the team. And you're pushing the team too hard." Sarah looked around at the other members of their boat crew. 6 men who were all bigger and stronger than she was, but who had just achieved their best performance because she had refused to let them settle for mediocrity. "Morrison, what's our job going to be if we make it through this program?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when we're deployed overseas, what are we going to be doing? Are we going to be playing games on a beach in California? Or are we going to be conducting operations where people's lives depend on our performance?" Morrison stared at her for a moment before answering. "Operations where lives depend on our performance. Then, what's more important," Sarah continued, "that you feel comfortable during training, or that we learn to perform at the level that will keep everyone alive when it matters?" The conversation ended there, but Sarah could see that Morrison was thinking about what she had said. Over the following days, she noticed that he began pushing himself and their teammates harder, demanding the same level of performance that she had been insisting on. By the end of the second month, Class 314 had shrunk to 89 candidates. Sarah was not only still there, she was beginning to be recognized as one of the top performers in the class. Her swimming times were consistently in the top 5. Her academic scores were among the highest. Most importantly, other candidates had begun looking to her for leadership during team exercises. But she also knew that the real test was still ahead. Hell Week was now just 2 weeks away, and everything she had experienced so far was just preparation for 5 days and nights that would either make her a SEAL or break her completely. The weekend before Hell Week, candidates were given a brief respite from training. Most used the time to rest, eat real food, and mentally prepare for what was coming. Sarah chose to visit her father in San Francisco. She hadn't seen him since their difficult conversation months earlier, and she wasn't sure what kind of reception to expect. When she knocked on the door of the family restaurant, her father answered with an expression that was guarded but not hostile. "You look different," he said, the same words Master Chief Rodriguez had used months earlier. "I am different," Sarah replied. "This training has changed me." They sat in an empty restaurant. It was Sunday, and they were closed, and Sarah tried to explain what the past 2 months had been like. She told them about the physical demands, the mental challenges, and the way the training had forced her to discover capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. "Are you happy?" her father asked when she had finished. It was a simple question, but Sarah found it difficult to answer. Was she happy? The training was brutal, the pressure was relentless, and she was constantly exhausted. But she was also more confident, more capable, and more certain of her purpose than she had ever been. "I'm fulfilled," she said finally. "I'm doing something that matters, something that most people can't do, and I'm good at it." Her father nodded slowly. "When I came to America, people told me I would fail. They said the language barrier was too great, that I didn't understand American business, that I should give up and go back to Taiwan. But I knew that if I could succeed here, I could give my children opportunities that wouldn't exist anywhere else." He paused, looking directly at his daughter. "I'm beginning to understand that this is your opportunity. Not the one I wanted for you, but the one you want for yourself. Does that mean you approve?" Sarah asked. "It means I support you," he replied. "Whether I approve or not isn't important anymore. You're an adult, and you're pursuing something you believe in. That's what I raised you to do." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. In 2 weeks, she would face the most challenging test of her life. The last thing she needed was to become emotional. "I need to ask you for something," she said. "Hell Week starts in 2 weeks. I won't be able to call or write or have any contact with the outside world for 5 days. If you don't hear from me for a while after that, it doesn't mean anything bad happened. It just means I'm focused on finishing what I started." Her father reached across the table and took her hand, the first physical contact they had shared since she joined the Navy. "Call me when it's over," he said. "Whether you succeed or fail, call me when it's over." Sarah returned to Coronado that evening with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. Whatever happened during Hell Week, she knew that she had the support of the people who mattered most to her. More importantly, she knew that she had prepared as well as anyone could prepare for what was coming. But as she lay in her bunk that night, listening to the other candidates trying to sleep despite their obvious nervousness about the ordeal ahead, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if all the preparation in the world would be enough. Hell Week had broken bigger, stronger, more experienced candidates. It had broken people who seemed mentally tougher than she was. And she was about to attempt it as the first woman ever to reach that point in the program. In 12 days, she would either be one step closer to earning her trident, or she would be on her way home, wondering what she could have done differently. There was no way to know which it would be. All she could do was give everything she had and hope it was enough. The clock on the wall read 22:47. Hell Week would begin in exactly 10 days, 4 hours, and 13 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that in just over a week, sleep would become a memory rather than a possibility. Hell Week began at midnight on a Sunday with what the instructors called breakout. Sarah had been warned that it would be intense, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of what happened when Senior Chief Williams appeared in the barracks doorway with a bullhorn and began screaming orders that were deliberately confusing and contradictory. "Everyone outside. Now. Move. 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 Bring your gear. No, leave your gear. Weapons ready. No weapons allowed. Form up on a beach. Form up in the classroom. Move faster. The candidates stumbled around in the darkness, trying to follow orders that changed every few seconds while instructors appeared from everywhere, screaming at the top of their lungs and adding to the chaos. Sleep-deprived and disoriented, most candidates made mistakes that resulted in additional punishment exercises. Sarah found herself doing push-ups in the sand while instructors poured cold water over her head and continued shouting conflicting orders. The chaos continued for hours. Just when the candidates thought they understood what was expected, the rules would change. They would be ordered to put on their gear, then immediately told to take it off. They would start running toward one objective, only to be redirected to another location before reaching it. Through it all, the instructors maintained a level of intensity that was designed to break anyone who lacked absolute determination. By dawn, Class 314 had lost 8 candidates. They simply couldn't handle the psychological pressure of constant uncertainty and criticism. They rang the bell and walked away, leaving their remaining classmates to continue the ordeal. Sarah had expected Hell Week to be physically challenging, but she discovered that the mental component was even more difficult. The instructors seemed to take special pleasure in targeting her for additional attention. During one evolution where the candidates were required to complete an obstacle course while carrying heavy equipment, an instructor appeared beside her and began a running commentary on her performance that was clearly designed to break her concentration. "Look at this, gentlemen. We've got someone who thinks she can do your job. Chun, do you really think you can carry a wounded teammate out of a combat zone? Because right now you can barely carry your own gear. Maybe you should ring that bell and go find a job that's more suited to your capabilities." Sarah gritted her teeth and continued through the obstacle course, refusing to respond to the taunts. She had been warned that the instructors would target her psychological weak points, trying to find something that would make her quit. She was determined not to give them that satisfaction. But as the first day wore on and exhaustion began to set in, Sarah started to understand why so many people quit during Hell Week. It wasn't just the physical demands or even the mental pressure. It was the relentless nature of the experience, the way challenges continued without any break or opportunity to recover. Just when you thought you had mastered one evolution, another would begin that was even more difficult. The candidates were divided into boat crews for most evolutions, and Sarah found herself working with 5 other candidates who had become her closest allies during the previous months of training. Morrison was there along with Rodriguez, the former Marine, Jackson, a quiet guy from Montana, Williams, a different Williams than the senior chief, and Murphy, whose Irish accent became more pronounced when he was tired, which meant it was now almost incomprehensible. Their first major test came on Monday evening during an evolution called Around the World. Each boat crew was required to paddle their rubber boat around the entire Coronado Peninsula, a distance of roughly 12 miles through ocean conditions that were deliberately chosen to be as challenging as possible. Sarah had excelled at paddling exercises during the previous months, but this was different. The ocean was rough, with waves that regularly washed over the boat and threatened to swamp it entirely. The candidates had been without sleep for over 36 hours, and their physical reserves were already depleted from constant activity. About 3 miles into the paddle, Murphy began showing signs of serious exhaustion. His paddle strokes became irregular, and he was having trouble maintaining the rhythm that the crew needed to make progress through the heavy seas. "Murphy, stay with us," Morrison called out, trying to encourage his struggling teammate. "We're all in this together." But Murphy was fading fast. Sarah could see that he was approaching the point where he would either quit or become a liability to the entire crew. This was the moment Senior Chief Williams had been preparing her for during their mountain runs. The moment where compassion might conflict with mission success. "Murphy, if you can't keep up, you need to ring out now," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the sound of wind and waves. "Don't wait until you put the rest of us at risk." The other crew members stared at her in shock. It was one thing to push people during training exercises, but suggesting that a teammate quit during Hell Week crossed a line that most of them weren't willing to cross. "Chin, what the hell is wrong with you?" Rodriguez shouted. "We don't leave people behind." "We don't leave people behind in combat," Sarah replied, never breaking rhythm with her paddle strokes. But this isn't combat. This is training designed to identify people who can handle combat. If Murphy can't handle this, he needs to find that out now, not when people's lives depend on him. For the next hour, the boat crew paddled in tense silence while Murphy struggled to keep up. Sarah's words had crystallized a conflict that most of them had been avoiding. The difference between being supportive teammates and being honest about each other's capabilities. The resolution came when they were about 2/3 of the way around the peninsula. Murphy suddenly stopped paddling entirely and looked up at his teammates with exhaustion and defeat clear in his eyes. "I can't do this," he said quietly. "I'm not strong enough." "Murphy, you can do this," Morrison said. "We'll help you. Just keep paddling." But Murphy shook his head. Chen was right. "If I can't handle this, I don't belong here. I'm going to ring out as soon as we get back." They completed the evolution as a crew, but Murphy was true to his word. As soon as they reached the beach, he walked to the bell and rang it 3 times, officially ending his participation in BUD/S training. The remaining members of the boat crew watched him go with mixed emotions. "You knew he was going to quit," Jackson said to Sarah, as they prepared for the next evolution. "When you told him he should ring out, you already knew he didn't have what it takes." Sarah nodded. "The question is whether we were helping him by letting him discover that now, or whether we should have carried him through Hell Week and let him find out later." It was a question that would be debated by the remaining candidates for the rest of the week, but it was also a question that separated those who would ultimately become SEALs from those who wouldn't. Being a SEAL meant making difficult decisions about team composition and individual capabilities, even when those decisions seemed harsh. By Tuesday night, Class 314 had shrunk to 34 candidates. The attrition rate was higher than normal, partly due to the exceptionally challenging conditions and partly due to the psychological pressure that came from having the first female candidate in the program. Everyone was under additional scrutiny, which added stress that made the already difficult training even more challenging. Sarah was still there, but she was beginning to understand why Hell Week broke so many people. The combination of sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and constant stress was creating a state of mind that she had never experienced. Simple tasks became monumentally difficult. Her body was operating on reserves she didn't know existed, and her mental processes were slowing down in ways that were genuinely frightening. Wednesday brought the evolution that nearly ended her participation in the program. The candidates were required to complete a series of underwater demolitions exercises that tested their ability to function while holding their breath for extended periods. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, but the stress and exhaustion of Hell Week had affected her lung capacity and her ability to remain calm while underwater. During the 3rd dive of the evolution, something went wrong. Sarah found herself disoriented underwater, unable to locate the surface or the underwater objective she was supposed to reach. Panic began to set in as her air supply ran low, and she couldn't determine which direction would lead her to safety. This was the moment that separated actual SEALs from people who were just physically capable of completing SEAL training. Instead of succumbing to panic, Sarah forced herself to remain calm and think through the problem logically. She stopped swimming, allowed herself to float, and used the direction of the air bubbles escaping from her mouth to determine which way was up. When she finally surfaced, she was nearly a minute past the time limit for the evolution. The instructors were preparing to fail her for not meeting the standard. But Senior Chief Williams had been watching the entire evolution, and he had seen what happened underwater. Chen completed the evolution, he announced to the other instructors. She may have been past the time limit, but she demonstrated the kind of problem-solving under stress that we're looking for. It was the first time during Hell Week that Sarah had received any positive feedback from the instructional staff. But it was also a reminder of how close she had come to failure and how little margin for error she had. Thursday was traditionally the most challenging day of Hell Week, featuring evolutions that tested every aspect of the candidate's capabilities. Sarah's boat crew had been reduced to 4 people following Murphy's departure, which made every evolution more difficult since they had less manpower to share the load. But they had also become more cohesive as a team. Morrison had emerged as a strong leader who could motivate the crew during difficult moments. Rodriguez brought tactical knowledge from his Marine Corps experience that helped them excel at military-oriented evolutions. Jackson had a quiet competence that made him the most reliable member of the crew. And Sarah had become the strategic thinker who could analyze complex problems and find solutions that others missed. Their finest moment came during an evolution called Steel Pier, where boat crews were required to navigate through a series of obstacles in near-zero visibility conditions. Most crews struggled with communication and coordination, leading to poor performance and additional punishment exercises. Sarah's crew succeeded by implementing a system she had developed based on her understanding of how military units operated in combat conditions. She assigned specific roles to each crew member, established clear communication protocols, and created contingency plans for various problems they might encounter. The result was a performance that impressed even the instructors who had been most skeptical about her presence in the program. They completed the evolution faster than any other crew and with fewer mistakes than most crews made under ideal conditions. Outstanding performance, Boat Crew 3, Senior Chief Williams announced when they finished. That's the kind of teamwork and leadership we expect from SEALs. By Friday morning, only 23 candidates remained from the original class of 180. Sarah was among them, but she was also approaching the limits of her physical and mental endurance. She had been awake for over 100 hours, eating only minimal rations, and pushing her body through exercises that would have been challenging under normal conditions. The final evolution of Hell Week was called So Solid Day, a series of challenges designed to test everything the candidates had learned while they were at their absolute lowest point. Sarah's hands were so swollen from the constant exposure to salt water and sand that she could barely grip her paddle. Her legs were cramping from dehydration and exhaustion. Her mind was operating in a fog that made complex thinking nearly impossible. But she was still there. And with only a few hours left in Hell Week, she began to believe that she might actually make it. The realization that she was going to succeed came during the last hour of Hell Week, as the remaining candidates were completing a final run on the beach while the instructors maintained their relentless verbal pressure. Sarah found herself running next to Morrison, the candidate who had questioned her presence in the program on the first day. "Chun," he said, his voice hoarse from 5 days of shouting and exhaustion, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" Sarah replied, though she could barely speak above a whisper. "For thinking you didn't belong here. You've earned this as much as any of us." When Hell Week officially ended at midnight on Friday, Sarah Chun stood with 22 other candidates who had survived the most demanding test in American military training. They were exhausted, battered, and fundamentally changed by the experience they had just endured. But they were also one step closer to earning the trident that would mark them as Navy SEALs. Sarah had become the first woman to successfully complete Hell Week, but more importantly, she had proven to herself and everyone around her that gender was irrelevant when it came to the qualities that made an effective special operations warrior. The celebration was brief. After a few hours of sleep and medical evaluation, the remaining candidates would continue with the next phase of BUD/S training. There would be months of additional challenges before any of them could call themselves SEALs. But Sarah knew that the hardest part was behind her. She had survived Hell Week not because standards had been lowered or special accommodations had been made, but because she possessed the same mental toughness and determination that had carried countless men through the same experience. As she finally fell into her bunk for the first real sleep she had gotten in 5 days, Sarah thought about the conversation she would have with her father. She had promised to call him when Hell Week was over, and she couldn't wait to tell him that she had not only survived, but excelled. She had no idea that her success was about to create a media firestorm that would make the rest of her training even more challenging than Hell Week had been. She had no idea that there were people actively working to discredit her accomplishment or that her every move was being scrutinized by congressional committees and Pentagon officials. All she knew was that she was still in the program, still pursuing her dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. And in a few months, if she continued to meet the standards, she would graduate as the first woman to earn the trident. But first, she had to finish BUD/S. And then she would have to prove herself in the real world, where the stakes were life and death, and there was no room for failure. 6 months later, Sarah Chun stood in the Norfolk Naval Base cafeteria, officially designated as Petty Officer First Class Chun and unofficially known as the first woman to complete Navy SEAL training. She had graduated from BUD/S 3 weeks earlier in a ceremony that had drawn media attention from around the world, but the novelty still felt surreal to her. The graduation ceremony had been everything she had imagined, and more. Captain Williams, the officer who had first offered her the opportunity to attempt SEAL training, had been there to pin the trident on her uniform. Her father had flown in from San Francisco, tears in his eyes as he watched his daughter achieve something that most people had considered impossible. Master Chief Rodriguez had driven down from his current assignment to witness the moment when a young sailor he had mentored aboard the Roosevelt became one of the most elite warriors in the American military. But the ceremony had also been complicated by the media attention and political implications of her success. News crews had captured every moment, and her graduation had been the subject of congressional hearings, Pentagon briefings, and editorial debates in newspapers across the country. Some praised her accomplishment as a breakthrough for gender equality. Others criticized it as a dangerous social experiment that would weaken military effectiveness. Sarah tried to ignore the external noise and focus on the reality of her new status. She was a Navy SEAL, assigned to SEAL Team 8 based in Norfolk. She had earned her place through the same training that every other SEAL had completed, and she was determined to prove herself in operational assignments just as she had proven herself in training. But first, she had to navigate the social dynamics of being the only woman in a community that had never included women before. It was a challenge she hadn't fully anticipated, and one that her SEAL training hadn't specifically prepared her for. The Norfolk cafeteria was neutral territory where SEALs from different teams often gathered for meals and informal conversations. Sarah had been eating there regularly for 3 weeks, gradually becoming a familiar presence to the other special operations personnel who frequented the facility. Most had been professional and respectful, though she could sense that many were still evaluating her and forming opinions about her capabilities. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Sarah was sitting alone at a corner table, reviewing intelligence briefings for an upcoming training exercise. She was dressed in standard Navy utilities with her trident clearly visible on her chest. To most casual observers, she looked like any other military professional grabbing a quick lunch. That's when Petty Officer Second Class Danny Morrison approached her table. Morrison was a SEAL from Team 6, a few years older than Sarah, with the kind of swagger that came from several successful deployments, and the assumption that his experience made him superior to newer team members. He had been watching Sarah from across the cafeteria for several minutes, and she had noticed his attention without acknowledging it. "Excuse me," Morrison said, standing next to her table with his arms crossed, "but I don't think we've been properly introduced." Sarah looked up from her briefing materials. "Petty Officer Chun," she said politely, extending her hand for a handshake. Morrison ignored the offer handshake. "That's not what I meant," he said, his voice loud enough to attract attention from nearby tables. "I meant, what's your actual rank? Because I'm having trouble believing that someone like you earned the right to wear that trident." The cafeteria began to quiet as other diners became aware that something was happening. Sarah could feel eyes turning toward their table, but she kept her voice calm and professional. "Petty Officer First Class, United States Navy," she replied. "SEAL Team 8. Is there something I can help you with?" Morrison laughed, a sound that carried no humor. "SEAL Team 8? Really? And how exactly did you earn that assignment? Because last time I checked, this job required certain physical capabilities that, well..." He gestured vaguely at her small frame. Sarah stood up slowly, closing her briefing folder and facing Morrison directly. She was nearly a foot shorter than he was, but something in her posture and demeanor caused him to take a half-step backward. "Are you questioning my qualifications?" she asked, her voice still calm, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I'm questioning how someone who looks like you could possibly meet the standards that the rest of us had to meet," Morrison replied, though his voice had lost some of its initial confidence. "I'm questioning whether standards were lowered to achieve some political objective." The cafeteria was now completely silent. 50 of the most elite warriors in the American military had stopped their conversations to watch what was happening between the veteran SEAL and the woman who had broken through barriers that most of them had never expected to be broken. Sarah looked around the room, making eye contact with several of the observers. Some looked curious, others uncomfortable. A few seemed to be enjoying the confrontation, but all of them were waiting to see how she would respond to the challenge. "State your rank," Morrison said, repeating his original demand with added emphasis. Sarah smiled for the first time since the conversation began. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Petty Officer First Class Sarah Chun," she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the cafeteria. "Graduate of BUD/S Class 314. Hell Week completion time, 5 days, 0 hours, 12 minutes. Class ranking, 4th out of 23 graduates. Combat swimmer qualification, expert. Close quarters combat rating, expert. Demolitions certification, advanced. Languages, English, Mandarin, Spanish. Security clearance, top secret with SCI access." She paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. "Combat deployments, none yet, but scheduled for Afghanistan next month. Training accidents during BUD/S, 0. Disciplinary actions during training, 0. Physical fitness test scores, consistently in the top 10% of all Navy personnel. Academic scores during SEAL training, top 5%. Morrison's confidence was visibly wavering, but he pressed on. "Anyone can memorize statistics," he said. "That doesn't prove you can do the job." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. Statistics don't prove operational capability. So let me ask you something, Morrison." She had noticed his name tape and rank insignia. "How many of your teammates from BUD/S Class 298 are still active SEALs?" Morrison looked confused by the question. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Humor me," Sarah said. "How many?" 16 out of 21 graduates, Morrison replied, though he seemed uncertain about where the conversation was heading. 16 out of 21, Sarah repeated. "That's a 76% retention rate, which is actually quite good. Want to know the retention rate for BUD/S Class 314? She didn't wait for him to respond. 23 out of 23 graduates are still active SEALs. 100% retention rate. And want to know why that is? The entire cafeteria was hanging on her words. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen. It's because Class 314 was the most scrutinized BUD/S class in history. Every candidate knew that their performance would be evaluated not just for their own careers, but as evidence in a national debate about military standards. Every instructor knew that any hint of lowered standards would end their careers. Every evolution was documented. Every score was verified. Every decision was reviewed by multiple levels of command. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. We didn't graduate 23 SEALs. We graduated 23 people who were held to higher standards than any SEAL class before or since. And every single one of us met those standards without special accommodation, without modified requirements, and without any consideration other than our ability to perform a mission. She stepped closer to Morrison, forcing him to look down at her. So, when you question my qualifications, you're not just questioning me. You're questioning the integrity of every instructor who evaluated my performance, every officer who signed off on my advancement, and every teammate who trusted me enough to graduate alongside me. Morrison was clearly struggling to respond. The confrontation wasn't going the way he had expected, and the attention from the entire cafeteria was making him uncomfortable. I've seen your service record, Morrison, Sarah continued. Though this was a bluff, she had no access to his personnel files. 3 deployments, solid performance, no major incidents. Respectable career. But here's what I want to know. During any of those deployments, did anyone question whether you deserved to be there based on what you looked like? That's different, Morrison said weakly. How is it different? Sarah asked. Either you can do the job or you can't. Either you met the standards or you didn't. Either you're qualified to be here or you're not. Your appearance, my appearance, none of that matters when bullets are flying and people's lives are on the line. She gestured to the room full of SEALs who were watching the exchange. Everyone in this room earned their place here through demonstrable performance. Everyone in this room has capabilities that 99% of the population lacks. Everyone in this room has made sacrifices and overcome challenges that most people can't imagine. And everyone in this room deserves the respect that comes with wearing this trident, regardless of what package those capabilities come in. Sarah picked up her briefing folder and prepared to leave. But before she walked away, she had one final point to make. Morrison, I don't know what your problem is with me. And frankly, I don't care. But let me make something clear. I didn't earn my trident to prove a political point or to advance some social agenda. I earned it because I want to serve my country at the highest level possible, and this is the highest level. I'm not here to be the first woman anything. I'm here to be the best SEAL I can be. She started to walk toward the exit, then stopped and turned back to face Morrison one last time. And if you ever want to test whether I can do this job, I'm happy to demonstrate my capabilities in any setting you choose. But next time, I'd suggest you think carefully about whether you really want to challenge someone who graduated fourth in a class where everyone was held to standards higher than you ever faced. Sarah walked out of the cafeteria in complete silence. For several seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then, conversations gradually resumed, though the tone was different from what it had been before the confrontation. Morrison stood at Sarah's former table for a moment, clearly unsure how to respond to what had just happened. Several other SEALs approached him, and while their conversations were quiet, it was clear that they were not offering him support or sympathy. Word of the cafeteria confrontation spread through the special operations community within hours. By the end of the day, Sarah had received calls from her commanding officer, Captain Williams, and even Senior Chief Williams from her BUD/S training. All of them had heard versions of the story and wanted to ensure that she was handling the situation appropriately. "Chun, I heard you had an interesting lunch today," Captain Williams said when she reported to his office that evening. "Yes, sir. I hope my response was appropriate for the situation." "From what I heard, your response was exactly what it needed to be," Williams replied. "But I want you to understand something. There are going to be more confrontations like that. Not everyone is going to be happy about the changes happening in the special operations community, and some people are going to take their frustrations out on you personally." "Understand, sir. I also want you to understand that your response today probably did more to establish your credibility than months of operational performance would have done. You stood up for yourself and for the integrity of the training that made you a SEAL. That's exactly what we need from our people." Williams paused, studying Sarah with the same intensity he had shown during their first meeting over a year earlier. "Next month, you'll deploy to Afghanistan with SEAL Team 8. It will be your first operational assignment, and it will be scrutinized just as intensely as your training was. Are you ready for that?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Outstanding. Because ready or not, you're about to find out whether everything you learned in training translates to the real world. And, Chun, when you're over there, remember that you're not representing women in the military or making political statements. You're a SEAL, and your job is to complete the mission and bring everyone home safely." 3 weeks later, Sarah was on a transport aircraft flying toward Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, beginning the deployment that would test everything she had learned during her journey from a restaurant in San Francisco to the most elite levels of American special operations. She carried with her the confidence that came from having proven herself through the most demanding training program in the military. She also carried the responsibility of representing not just herself, but everyone who would follow in her footsteps. But most importantly, she carried the same commitment to excellence that had driven her from the beginning, the determination to be not the first woman SEAL, but simply the best SEAL she could possibly be. The confrontation in the Norfolk cafeteria would be remembered for years.